Welcome to ZOZO Sleepy Stories. We're thrilled to have you here for another cozy tale to spark your imagination. If you enjoy our stories, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with your friends and family. Your support helps us keep the bedtime magic alive. Now, grab your blanket, get comfy, and let's dive into tonight's story. Good evening, traveler. Let's leave the noise behind now and wander together into a time long past. A world wrapped in mist and candlelight, where the air smelled of thyme and wood smoke, and secrets bloomed quietly in the soil. Close your eyes if you'd like, and imagine a tiny cottage nestled at the edge of a forest. Its roof made of thatch, its windows small and square. Smoke curls from the chimney. The night is quiet, save for the soft rustle of trees and the occasional hoot of an owl. And just beyond the cottage, hidden behind a crooked wooden fence, there's a garden. Not the kind with neat rows of carrots and cabbages. No, this garden is different. It's wild, overgrown, and humming with strange energy. Tall stalks twist toward the moonlight. Leaves shimmer as if they remember something. Some flowers droop low as if listening to the earth. Others tilt their heads like gossiping neighbors. And if you listen closely, very closely, you might hear them whisper. This, my friend, is the garden of forgotten remedies. You see, long before our modern world of pharmacies and prescriptions, people turned to the soil for relief. The garden was their cabinet, their sanctuary, their mystery. Back then, if your tooth ached or your heart felt too heavy to carry, you didn't book an appointment. You wandered out into the morning dew and asked the plants for help. Now, this wasn't always wise. The Middle Ages, soaked in superstition and shadow, were a time when medicine, magic, and mischief lived under the same leaky roof. And in this strange and wondrous world, the idea of getting high didn't exist the way we think of it today. There were no college dorms and lava lamps, no sleepy-eyed poets fumbling for guitar strings. No, sir. Instead, people spoke of visions, divine dreams, ecstasies. Sometimes it was a spiritual journey. Sometimes it was just a very bad decision on an empty stomach. And more often than not, it all began in a garden just like this. Let's imagine someone lived here. Perhaps an old woman with calloused hands and a shawl that smelled faintly of lavender and smoke. Folks called her wise. Others called her dangerous. But everyone came to her when the pain got too sharp, or the nights too long. She knew which roots to crush for sleep, which seeds to stir into wine for courage, which leaves could make a man forget the grief buried deep inside him, or at least quiet it for a while. She didn't need a title. She had knowledge, the kind passed down not in books, but in whispers by firelight, and her garden was alive with it. Let me tell you about some of her favorites. There was henbane, a plant with yellowish flowers veined in purple, looking almost too pretty for its own good. In small doses, it soothed the mind and dulled the pain, but in larger ones, well, Let's just say it might make you believe the neighbor's goat was reciting psalms. Then there was mandrake, the famous root shaped eerily like a tiny human. Legends said it screamed when pulled from the ground, a scream so terrible it could kill a man. People believed this so fiercely that they'd tie the root to a dog and run away, letting the poor beast do the dirty work. If they survived the harvest, they'd grind it into wine or tuck it beneath pillows, hoping for dreams sent by angels, or devils, or someone in between. And belladonna. Oh, she was the beautiful one. Her berries looked like glossy black pearls. Women once dropped the juice into their eyes to make their pupils widen. Large, dark, and haunting. Beauty, yes. But blindness and confusion weren't far behind. Belladonna didn't care if you were trying to look lovely or seeking peace. She worked on her own terms. All of these lived side by side in that garden, like members of a strange, unruly family. Each one had a gift. Each one had a curse. But back then, folks didn't separate the two so cleanly. There was no dividing line between medicine and magic, between prayer and potion. If a tonic calmed your fever and also made you hear your grandmother singing in Latin from the rafters, well, that was just Tuesday. And so, across medieval Europe, gardens like this bloomed quietly behind cottages and monasteries. Some belonged to monks, their knowledge wrapped in Latin and scripture. Others belonged to barefoot herbalists, their cures remembered only in rhyme. And a few, just a few, belonged to the women who lived alone on the edge of town. Women who stirred potions with one hand and baked bread with the other. Who healed quietly without blessing or permission. Some called them witches. Others called them saviors. And in those long, damp winters when the sun barely rose and the cold crept into your bones, even the skeptical might find themselves knocking gently at their door. You might wonder, were these people trying to get high? Were they chasing visions the way some chase thrills today? Maybe. Maybe not. But remember, there was no Netflix in the Middle Ages, no espresso, no Tylenol. When the world turned dark and heavy, sometimes a bit of root in hot wine was the only thing standing between you and despair. The garden didn't judge. It simply offered. So tonight, as you drift toward sleep, let your thoughts wander there. Past the creaking fence, under the silver moonlight, into the tangled leaves where ancient knowledge hums. Maybe you'll find the mandrake curled beneath the sage, or henbane watching from the shadows. Or perhaps, if you listen softly, you'll hear the voice of the old woman herself, reminding you that even in the darkest times, there has always been a place, quiet, fragrant, a little strange, where healing waits. Not always safe, not always clear, but always there, waiting, like a whisper in the garden. Welcome back, wanderer. The night is still, and the stars above blink softly, like lanterns in a faraway harbor. So fluff your pillow, pull the blanket up just a little higher, and let's return to that old garden where things whisper, roots remember, and dreams don't always ask permission. Tonight, we speak of henbane, a plant with a name that already sounds like it might misbehave. Not quite noble, not quite wicked, just mischievous. Now, if you were to spot henbane in the wild, you might not think much of it. It's not showy. It doesn't boast the color of poppies or the dazzle of daisies. Its pale yellow flowers, veined in violet, look like they've been drawn by a bored god with a shaky hand. And yet, oh yet, this little weed has a history rich with mystery, medicine, and more than a few misunderstandings. In medieval Europe, henbane was not a stranger. Quite the opposite. It grew in gardens, in forests, along roads, and even in graveyards, where the soil was rich with stories. The old herbals, written by monks and mystics alike, listed henbane by name, Hyoscyamus niger, noting both its healing and its hazards. Let's say you lived in a small stone cottage, and you had a toothache that made you want to weep. The local healer might brew a tiny cup of tea with henbane leaves. Just a sip, mind you, to numb the pain and quiet the nerves. Or if you were having trouble sleeping, tormented by the echoes of the day, a poultice of henbane might help you slip into darkness without dreams. But here's the catch. Just a bit too much. And you weren't just sleeping. You were soaring through hallucinations. You might see strange lights behind your eyelids, hear voices in languages you didn't know. You might find yourself lost in your own cottage, swearing the firewood was whispering secrets about your ancestors. Henbane was like a button inside your brain. Press it gently and it soothed. Slam it down, and things got very strange, very fast. Even today, scientists know why. Henbane contains chemicals like scopolamine and hyoscyamine, which tinker with the nervous system in ways that can be both helpful and haunting. These compounds mess with neurotransmitters, those little messengers that help your brain say things like, "I'm awake," or "That's a table, not a talking frog." When those signals get crossed, well, reality starts to wobble. Some people who took henbane reported seeing the dead. Others thought they were flying. A few believed they had turned into animals, trees, or, in one memorable tale, a singing fish. The plant didn't care if you were noble or peasant, priest or thief. It opened the same strange door for everyone. Still, it wasn't just taken by mouth. No, that was often too risky. Some chose to burn it and inhale the smoke, which danced through the mind like a mischievous wind. Others infused it into oils and rubbed it onto the skin. In rare cases, particularly among those practicing old rituals, henbane was part of the infamous flying ointments, blended with fat and applied to, shall we say, highly absorbent areas of the body. And when the visions came, they were often wild, yes, but also deeply spiritual. In a time when saints were said to speak through dreams, and demons hid behind fevers. Who could say whether what you saw under henbane's spell was madness or a message? But not everyone was so enchanted. The church, ever watchful of anything that bent reality without divine permission, grew suspicious. Visions, after all, were supposed to come from God, not gardens. And if a peasant woman claimed she'd flown above the village or spoken to angels after sipping a strange tea, well, you can imagine how that ended. Yet, despite suspicion, henbane persisted. Why? Because pain doesn't ask permission. Grief doesn't wait for approval. When your child had a fever, when your husband couldn't sleep, when your own thoughts grew too sharp, people turned to what they had. And what they had, more often than not, grew quietly in the soil behind the house. Sometimes, healing doesn't come in shining bottles with perfect labels. Sometimes, it comes tangled in roots, smelling of earth and risk. That was henbane. Dangerous, yes. But for those who had nothing else, it was hope in a leaf. Even in times of war, soldiers carried dried henbane leaves to dull the agony of wounds. Mothers whispered prayers over it as they crushed it into mortar. And old apothecaries, hands shaking from age, would still measure it carefully. Half a pinch, not a grain more, as if the plant might bite back. They weren't wrong. There's an old tale, barely remembered now, of a village deep in the Black Forest. One winter, food ran short. The local healer made a brew to help the people sleep through hunger. She misjudged the dose. That night, the village dreamed together of music, fire, and a feast that never ended. Some said it was beautiful. Others said it was terrifying. But by morning, the healer was gone, and so was the recipe. Henbane, they say, remembered. And now, as you drift deeper into your own sleep, you might wonder, what would it be like to step through that veil? To feel your thoughts stretch, your senses shift, and your soul untethered just for a little while. Don't worry. Tonight, you're safe. There's no henbane in the air, only the soft rhythm of breath and the gentle hum of story. But perhaps, just perhaps, if you dream of a crooked garden gate and a woman with leaves in her hair, you'll know what door you've found. Rest easy now. There are more stories to come. Settle in, dear friend. The fire's burning low, casting shadows that dance gently along the floor. The wind outside is quiet now, and the night holds its breath, waiting. We return once more to the garden, the one tucked behind the crooked fence where things grow not just with roots, but with memories. And tonight, we speak of the most curious root of them all. Mandrake. Even the name has a weight to it, doesn't it? It rolls off the tongue like a secret, half warning, half invitation. Mandrake is no ordinary plant. For centuries it was feared, revered, and whispered about in stories passed from grandmother to grandchild. And if you believe even half those tales, well, you'll understand why no one ever picked it lightly. Let's begin with how it looks. You wouldn't expect magic to grow so close to the ground, but the mandrake does. Low, leafy, unassuming, until you pull it up. That's when the strangeness begins. You see, the mandrake root grows in twisted shapes, often resembling a tiny human figure. Arms outstretched, legs curled, sometimes with what looks like a screaming mouth frozen in a silent wail. To the medieval imagination, this wasn't just a plant. This was something alive. Something with a soul. And here's the part that made even the bravest pause. Legend said that when the root was pulled from the earth, it screamed. Not just any scream, a deadly scream. A scream so loud and terrible it could strike a man dead on the spot. So, what did our cautious ancestors do? They got clever. The old harvesting method, passed around like a recipe for disaster, involved tying the mandrake root to a dog. Yes, a dog. Then the gatherer would walk far away, cover their ears, and coax the dog forward. The dog would pull, the root would come loose, the scream would echo, and the dog, they feared, would fall. It's a sad story, possibly just myth. But in the Middle Ages, myths carried the same weight as medicine, and so people believed, because belief is often more powerful than fact, especially in a world lit by candlelight and shaped by wonder. But if someone was brave enough, or perhaps desperate enough, to harvest the mandrake, they were rewarded. You see, this root wasn't just a garden oddity. It was medicine. It was mystery. And for some, it was a gateway. Boiled in wine, mandrake could ease pain. Crushed into paste, it could dull the agony of wounds. Carried in a pouch, it was thought to bring fertility to the barren and courage to the frightened. And for those who dared to consume it directly, dreams. Deep, prophetic dreams. The kind that feel like more than just imagination. The kind that linger when you wake and leave you wondering if what you saw was a message meant just for you. Of course, it didn't always go so smoothly. A bit too much mandrake and your dreams became something else entirely. Visions twisted. Time unraveled. Your reflection might speak back to you, or vanish altogether. You might walk into the forest thinking it's your home, or speak languages no one else knows. In short, it played tricks with your mind, and your sense of what was real. Yet still, people used it. Not out of recklessness, but because when the pain was too sharp, or the soul too heavy, mandrake offered an escape. It offered the possibility of peace, and for many that was worth the risk. It was also a symbol of magic, yes, but also of forbidden knowledge. The church often frowned upon its use. Too many strange dreams, too many unexplained recoveries, too many women with answers that didn't come from scripture. But the mandrake didn't care about dogma. It grew quietly beneath the soil, waiting for those who would listen. And listen they did. There's an old tale, told in fragments now, about a midwife who lived near the edge of a village. She kept a mandrake wrapped in linen, nestled in a small wooden box beside her bed. She never used it, not directly, but she would speak to it on nights when the wind blew strange and the stars flickered in odd patterns. She said it whispered back. No one ever dared ask what it said. Some claim her home always smelled of lavender and smoke. Others swear her eyes had flecks of gold that shimmered when she spoke. But one thing they all agreed on. No mother ever died in childbirth when she was near. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe, just maybe. The mandrake was listening. In time, the root became a staple of grimoires, those old handwritten books filled with herbs, charms, and cures scribbled in cramped ink. Some pages warned against it. Others gave detailed instructions. Boil with red wine. Bury under the full moon. Sleep with it beneath your pillow. but only if your soul is calm. Strange advice, isn't it? But back then, the soul was considered just as real and just as fragile as the body. Tonight, as you lie in your bed, soft and still, the world around you faded into a gentle hush. It's worth remembering this. The people of the past weren't so different from us. They longed for comfort, for clarity, for connection. When life was hard, they reached for what they had. And sometimes what they had was a root shaped like a human, tucked beneath the earth like a secret. So if you dream of walking barefoot through soft moss, and you find a plant with limbs like yours, eyes closed as if waiting, be gentle. It might just be the mandrake. And it might have something to tell you. Sleep well now. There are more stories waiting just below the surface. Welcome back, dreamer. Tonight, the world outside your window has gone quiet again. The trees have stilled. The stars lean in just a little closer, as if they too are curious what happens next. So rest your head, soften your thoughts, and let me tell you about the most enchanting, most dangerous bloom in the garden. Her name was Belladonna. Even the name sounds like a whisper from another time, doesn't it? Belladonna, the beautiful lady. But make no mistake, this lady wore a velvet cloak of elegance and poison. She was beauty and danger, fragrance and fatality. Belladonna grew in the corners of old Europe like a secret, often where no one looked closely enough. A bushy plant with dark green leaves and glossy black berries that shimmered like spilled ink beneath the moonlight. They looked delicious, tempting, like something a child might pluck for a snack on a summer afternoon. But one bite, and the world would slip sideways. Let me tell you how it all began. In the courts of medieval Europe, fashion was never just fabric. It was ritual, strategy, a kind of silent warfare of silk and scent and shadowed glances. Among the nobility, beauty was power, and power, as you know, is always hungry. Noble women, desiring to appear more alluring, more mysterious, discovered that belladonna juice, diluted just so, could be dropped into the eyes. Just a drop or two. The pupils would dilate, wide and dark, giving the woman an otherworldly gaze, soft and deep like a cathedral window catching twilight. It was the look of saints in old paintings, of goddesses, of something not entirely human. But vision blurred, light became unbearable, and sometimes the body paid dearly for that borrowed allure. Dizziness, nausea, hallucinations, and, in rare cases, silence, forever. Still, the practice spread, because nothing tempts quite like forbidden beauty. But Belladonna's story doesn't end in royal courtrooms. Out in the villages, in the shadows behind chapels and market stalls, her powers were used differently. The healers and herbalists, those wise ones living between blessing and suspicion, knew how to use her for more than vanity. They crushed her leaves into pastes, stirred her into wine, measured her into sleeping draughts. A little belladonna could ease childbirth, quiet pain, calm a frenzied mind, but just a touch too much. And the visions began. People saw angels in the rafters, wolves in their reflection, heard long-dead voices from within the fire, Some believed they were flying. Others thought they had become stone. The body lay still, but the mind wandered far. Belladonna contains a host of alkaloids, strange little chemicals with names like atropine and scopolamine. Today, we understand what they do. Back then, they were magic, invisible threads that pulled the soul towards something vast and unknowable. Witches, those women accused of dancing under moonlight and consorting with shadows, were often said to use belladonna in their infamous flying ointments. Mixed with henbane, mandrake, and fat, the paste would be applied to the skin, or, as some whispered, to far more intimate places where the veil between sensation and spirit was thinnest. Within minutes, the body would relax, and the dream would begin. They didn't fly through the air, of course, not with brooms, not with wings, but in their minds they soared over forests, across oceans of stars, into otherworldly feasts where devils poured wine and danced with saints. And when they woke, mud-streaked, breathless, teeth aching, they remembered only pieces, a flash of light, a strange song, the taste of something sweet and smoky on the wind. The church, ever wary of things that made people feel too free, too different, too difficult to control, labeled these visions as demonic, and perhaps, to some, they were. But for many, they were simply moments of escape, of surrender, of transcendence, and Belladonna, silent and elegant in her corner of the garden, watched it all. She didn't judge. She didn't care whether you were seeking beauty, healing, or something far beyond both. She offered her gift. It was up to you to take it, or leave it. There's a story, barely remembered now, of a young monk who came to a cloister high in the mountains, troubled by dreams and the weight of his thoughts. The abbess, older than winter, brewed him a tea from petals and bark. He sipped, unsure. That night he dreamt of a door in the sky, and through it his mother's voice, soft, forgiving, singing a lullaby he hadn't heard since he was a boy. He woke with tears and peace, and never spoke of the tea again. Belladonna, perhaps, or perhaps something else. Tonight, as you lie in stillness, breathing in the safety of your room, think of her. Not with fear, but with understanding. She was never just poison. She was choice, a mirror, a lie that sometimes felt like truth. Because sometimes when life is too sharp, too heavy, too loud, we long for a softer version of reality, a haze, a filter, something just blurry enough to bear. Belladonna gave people that, at a cost. But then, most beautiful things do. Sleep well now. We have more stories ahead. Roots that fly, mushrooms that laugh, and dreams that drift in smoke. But for tonight, let your thoughts bloom gently and fade. Come closer now. The night grows deeper, and the stars have tilted their faces toward the earth, as if they too are listening. You've followed us through shadowed gardens and whispered roots, through remedies that tiptoe the line between healing and haunting. But tonight, dear dreamer, we speak of something more elusive, more daring. Tonight we speak of flight, not with wings, not with broomsticks, but with ointment. A strange word, isn't it? ointment. It doesn't sound magical. It sounds sticky, medicinal, like something rubbed on elbows or knees. But in the hidden corners of medieval life, it was something else entirely. You see, while kings and priests ruled the land, while scholars debated stars and sins, there were others, quiet figures in the margins, who knew things. Women, mostly, midwives, healers, widows, and wild things. They lived on the edge of town. They spoke to animals. They remembered the old ways. And when the weight of the world pressed too hard, they had a recipe. They called it the flying ointment. Its ingredients were not for the faint of heart. Belladonna, mandrake, henbane. Plants we've already met, each with their own dark melody. Add to that the fat of animals, the blood of rituals, perhaps a whisper or two from something older than Scripture. Stirred together under a new moon, it became a potion unlike any other. But here's where the tale turns. This ointment wasn't drunk. Oh no, it was far too dangerous for the stomach. Instead, it was rubbed on the skin, where the barrier between body and spirit is thinnest. Some say it was applied to the temples, the wrists, the thighs. Others, well, let's just say the most effective places were also the most personal. And once the ointment seeped in, slowly, warmly, the world began to change. The fire flickered, and so did the mind. Shadows took on new shapes. The floor became sky. The ceiling dissolved. And the soul lifted. Did they really fly? That depends on what you believe. Some said they soared over treetops, naked under the stars, laughter in their mouths, and wind in their bones. Some said they met the devil himself at a feast where the wine flowed endlessly and the music never stopped. Others said they simply hovered, above the roof, above the village, above the ache of everyday life. But in truth, none of them ever left the room. The body stayed still, curled on the hearthrug or nestled in straw. But the mind, oh, the mind went dancing. The church, of course, was not amused. Visions were meant for saints, not for women with mortar and pestle. Flight was a miracle, not a moonlit escape plan. And so, these ointments became evidence, not of chemistry or coping, but of heresy. They were tools of witches, the inquisitors said, proof of communion with devils, of rebellion, of sin. But perhaps they were simply medicine. Because sometimes when grief has worn you hollow, when fear tightens around your ribs like a corset, when the world has offered you nothing but dust and judgment, a dream can feel like salvation. The flying ointment gave these women something the world had denied them: agency, freedom, a doorway. And though they paid a price, fear, exile, fire, they flew. There's a tale of one such woman. Her name is lost now. Maybe Anna, maybe Elsbeth, maybe something stranger. She lived at the edge of a dense wood where wolves howled and wild thyme grew in thick carpets. They say she brewed her ointment from roots she spoke to, that she wore no shoes, that no child ever died under her care. One night, when the snow fell sideways and the moon refused to rise, the village came for her. They knocked down her door, found her asleep, still breathing but unmoving with the ointment beside her. They called it sorcery. But maybe, just maybe, she was flying, far above their torches and fear, far above the cold. Maybe she never came back. Tonight, we don't judge her. We remember her. Because to fly is not always about wings. It's about the will to rise when the world wants you small. It's about slipping out the window of your own mind for a while. To drift, to dream, to become. So rest now. You don't need an ointment, just breath, just story, just stillness. But if, in your sleep, you feel yourself floating, don't be afraid. You're not lost. You're just traveling a little. Tonight, the wind outside is softer, like breath against glass. The world has quieted. Even the trees seem to sway more gently, as if they too are falling asleep. So let's return again to our crooked garden of old remedies, half-forgotten rituals, and dreams that shimmer just beyond reach. But tonight, we stray from intention, for this isn't a story of potions or ointments, but of something far simpler. Bread. Yes, bread. The most ordinary of comforts. Warm, familiar. The smell of safety in almost every home. But once in the shadowy folds of medieval Europe, it became something else entirely. Something wild, unpredictable, and very, very strange. The culprit? A tiny fungus with a big imagination. Its name was ergot, a dark, parasitic mold that grew quietly on rye, especially in the damp, cold fields of France and the Germanic regions. To the eyes of a weary medieval baker, it didn't look like much. Just a few blackened kernels mixed in with the grain. Odd-looking, maybe. But when the harvest was poor and hunger pressed in from every corner, no one could afford to be picky. And so it happened. The ergot-infected rye was ground, mixed, kneaded into dough, and baked in simple ovens. The bread it produced? Seemingly normal. A little darker, a little denser, but still bread. Families gathered at the table. Children tore off pieces. Old men dipped slices in broth. And then, the real feast began. Within hours, sometimes days, strange things started to happen. People saw visions. Their limbs twitched and trembled. Some laughed uncontrollably. Others screamed. There were seizures, fevers, people dancing in the streets until their feet bled and their hearts gave out. They called it the dancing plague. And for those who watched it unfold, it felt like the world itself had lost its mind. But the cause wasn't demons or curses, as many believed. It was the bread. Ergot, as we now know, contains alkaloids related to LSD, a powerful hallucinogen. It doesn't just affect the body, it rewrites the mind. It turns thoughts into spirals, shapes into creatures, and fears into fire. Imagine biting into toast and feeling your hands turn to spiders. Imagine trying to pray and hearing the pews whisper back. Imagine dancing, not because you want to, but because your legs have become puppets on invisible strings. That was ergot, and no one saw it coming. There's one tale, told in hushed tones, of a village in eastern France. The year was 944. The winter had been cruel, the grain stores nearly empty. Then came spring, and with it, new bread. They baked, they shared, they ate. By nightfall, the church bells rang without hands. A woman screamed that her husband had turned into a crow. A child tried to fly from the steeple. People flooded the chapel, begging for absolution, speaking in tongues, shaking uncontrollably. More than 40 died, not from violence, not from plague, from bread. Of course, no one knew about mold or microscopic toxins, so they turned to what they did understand: spirits, punishment, the devil. The bread was cursed, the people possessed. Some were burned, others exiled. The rest just prayed harder. Ironically, the cure was simple: wheat. Unlike rye, wheat didn't host ergot easily. And so, some healers, particularly the Order of St. Anthony, who tended to the sick with quiet hands and kind eyes, began feeding afflicted people only wheat-based meals. The convulsions slowed. The hallucinations faded. The world returned to normal, or something close to it. And yet, the memory lingered. Imagine it: a whole village dreaming the same fever dream, a shared descent into something beyond logic. No potions, no prayers, just bread. Bread that bit back. Centuries later, some historians believe that ergot played a role in even darker chapters, like the Salem witch trials, the fits, the visions, the accusations. Could moldy grain have turned a town into a theater of fear? No one knows for sure, but the idea remains. Sometimes the strangest trips begin not with intention, but with breakfast. And so tonight, as you drift deeper into stillness, take a moment to thank the quiet luxury of knowing what's in your bread, of living in a world where food rarely whispers back, of sleeping without fear that toast might rewrite your dreams. The people of the past didn't have that comfort, but they did what they could. They survived the strange nights, the strange bread, the strange dances, and in their stories, half forgotten, half true, we find wonder. Not because they were perfect, but because they were human, just like us. Sleep well now. Next time, we'll meet a different kind of sweetness, one made not of grain, but of honey and hallucination. Welcome back, gentle listener. The fire has dimmed to embers now, and your thoughts are floating just above the edge of dreaming. That's where we need to be, for tonight's story comes wrapped in sweetness, but it carries a shimmer of strangeness, a taste of something not quite of this world. Tonight, we're talking about honey, but not the kind you stir into tea. Not the kind found in cheerful golden jars lined up on market shelves. No, this is mad honey. It comes from the mountains, the kind of mountains that loom like giants in their sleep, somewhere along the rugged ridgelines of ancient Anatolia, where the air is thin, the flowers bloom with secrets, and the bees. Well, the bees are in on it. You see, in those high-altitude meadows, wild rhododendrons bloom in purples and pinks. Beautiful, yes, but laced with grayanotoxins, natural compounds that don't sit well with the human body. The bees, ever industrious and unworried, visit these blossoms anyway, collecting nectar the way they always do. But when they carry it home and spin it into golden syrup, something changes. The result is mad honey, smooth, fragrant, familiar, until it isn't. For when a human takes even a spoonful of this honey, something strange begins to happen. The heart slows, the body warms, the edges of the room begin to melt. Lights flicker, not from candles, but from somewhere behind the eyes. The mind drifts, softly, like fog rolling down a hill. And suddenly, reality feels less certain, more optional. Some feel euphoria, some nausea. Some float in slow motion through their own lives like characters in a dream they didn't mean to write. This was no accident of nature. This was chemistry and myth, dancing hand in hand. The ancient Greeks knew about it. The soldiers of Xenophon, a student of Socrates, once marched through the Black Sea region and stumbled upon local honeycombs left behind in deserted villages. Hungry and tired, the men devoured them. They didn't laugh. They didn't cheer. They collapsed, disoriented, weak, confused. The records say they recovered a day later, dazed but alive. But the story lingered. Mad honey was remembered, not just as a curiosity, but as a weapon. Yes, a weapon. Some local tribes, clever and cunning, are said to have used it as a trap for invading armies. Leave behind a few honeypots along a tempting trail. Wait, watch. And when the soldiers fall to their knees, dizzy and trembling, strike. But honey, like many things in nature, isn't just a blade. It's also a balm. In the old folk traditions of Turkey, Persia, and beyond, mad honey wasn't always feared. It was used carefully to treat pain, high blood pressure, anxiety. It was said to clear the mind, to open it, to allow visions. Some mystics believed it could unlock prophetic dreams. Others used it in rituals meant to bring healing through altered perception, softening the walls between worlds just enough to listen for a moment to something deeper. There's an old tale from the Caucasus Mountains of a beekeeper who lived alone. He kept a few hives on a cliffside where the rhododendrons bloomed thick. His honey was darker than usual, less sweet, but it shimmered. People came to him, not for sugar, but for sleep. He never sold it. He gave it only to those who needed to forget something or remember something long buried. Some returned with stories of dreams that healed old grief. Others returned with silence in their eyes, as if they'd seen something they didn't quite understand. And some never came back at all. Mad honey doesn't judge, it offers. What happens next depends on the soul that swallows it. Tonight, in the quiet hum of your own breath, far from those ancient mountains and their dreaming bees, mad honey may feel like a fairy tale, a myth wrapped in golden syrup. But isn't it beautiful to think that even the smallest creature, the humble bee, can become an alchemist? That sweetness can carry danger. That danger can carry healing. That somewhere, hidden in a golden jar, is a story just waiting to unfold on the tongue. So rest now. Let your dreams bloom gently, like rhododendrons in fog. And if you happen to taste something strange in your sleep, something floral, warm, and just a little wild, smile. It might just be honey. The night is fully settled now. Even the wind seems to have curled up for sleep. And here you are, resting quietly, drifting ever so gently between the world that is and the world that was. Let's take a small step further into that second world, where saints whispered in smoke, and salvation sometimes came in a cup. Tonight, our story isn't about roots or potions or honey stirred in secret. Tonight, we talk about incense and wine. Two ancient comforts, two everyday miracles. One for the soul, one for everything else. Let's start with incense, the kind burned in cathedrals, temples, and tiny stone chapels with windows too small and dreams too large. Picture it now, a flickering candle, a chorus humming softly, and a golden censer swinging slowly back and forth, casting trails of silvery smoke through the air. That smoke wasn't just for beauty. It wasn't even just for prayer. It was for transformation. In the medieval world, incense, especially frankincense and myrrh, was considered sacred, imported from lands that lived mostly in the imagination. Arabia, Ethiopia, distant deserts with sun-bleached stones and holy winds. Monks believed the smoke carried prayers upward, that it cleansed the spirit, that it softened the edge of reality, like warm fog over a cold field. But here's what they didn't always know. When burned in great quantities in close quarters, like old churches with thick stone walls and no windows, incense could do something else. It could alter the mind. Modern scientists now tell us that frankincense releases compounds like insensole acetate, which interacts with parts of the brain linked to emotion and memory. In simpler terms, it makes you feel calm, slightly detached, a little floaty. So when the monks sang in Latin and the candles shimmered, and the incense curled like a staircase into heaven, perhaps their visions weren't only divine. Perhaps some of them were gently, unknowingly, high. But no one asked too many questions. Not then. If someone fell into a trance during Mass, it was a blessing. If a young friar said he'd heard God speak from the rafters, they built a chapel around the story. After all, it's easier to believe in miracles when the room already smells like one. But incense wasn't the only escape. Let's walk now from the chapel to the tavern. The pews may be gone, but the warmth remains. Here, the altar is a wooden table, the priest is a brewer, and the blessing comes in a tankard, not a chalice. Wine, ale, mead, small beer. In the medieval world, alcohol wasn't a luxury, it was necessity. Water, especially in cities, was often unsafe. Wells could be tainted. Rivers ran downstream from livestock. But fermentation? Fermentation killed the bad things, left the good things, and maybe, if you were lucky, smoothed the edges of a hard day. Children drank small beer, barely alcoholic, just enough to be clean. Adults drank wine and ale daily, not to forget, but to function. And yet, people did forget. Sometimes by accident, sometimes on purpose. After all, if you lived in a one-room hut with 6 other people and a goat that didn't like you, a cup of warm, spiced wine could feel like a brief vacation. It was medicine, too. Monks, those diligent keepers of both souls and yeast, kept meticulous records of herbal ales. They added sage, hops, wormwood, even a dash of crushed poppy. Not just for flavor, but for feeling. They called it sleep tonic, or comfort wine, or the good bottle. You drank to sleep. You drank to dream. You drank to forget, but gently. There's an old saying, God gave wine to man so he might endure the burden of being awake. Perhaps they were right. And sometimes the line between sacred and social blurred. A little wine before confession, not uncommon. A little too much wine after funerals, practically expected. In those moments, people found their own rituals, not written in books, not sanctioned by clergy, just quiet ones. A cup by the fire, a sigh into the steam, a few hours where the heart could breathe again. That was the gift, not intoxication, but relief. And like the incense in the chapel, or the mad honey in the jar, it wasn't about escape for escape's sake. It was about finding something softer, something quieter, somewhere to rest. And that, dear dreamer, is why these things remain. Long after the monks have stopped chanting and the taverns have turned to ruins, we still light candles. We still sip. We still seek the warmth of what's ancient and enduring. Tonight, perhaps you can imagine a little smoke drifting through your room. Not heavy, not sharp, just a whisper of resin and memory. Or maybe you'll dream of a medieval inn, fire roaring, a gentle clink of mugs, and the laughter of someone who's finally let their shoulders drop. Wherever your mind goes, follow it. This is your escape now, without the incense, without the wine, just story, just rest, just peace. The stars have shifted slightly now, tracing their quiet arcs across the sky, and here we are, still together, moving softly through stories older than sleep, stories made of plants and prayers, silence and surrender. Tonight, we leave the candlelit chapels of Europe and journey eastward, toward minarets, silk wind, and the sacred gardens of the mind. This is a story about hashish, but not the kind whispered about in modern alleyways. No, this is an older story, a deeper one wrapped in poetry, breath, and devotion. Long ago, in the cities of the Islamic Golden Age, Baghdad, Cairo, Damascus, knowledge bloomed like jasmine at dusk. Science, medicine, mathematics, music. But alongside the pursuit of reason, there was also the pursuit of the divine, not through doctrine, but through experience. And this is where the Sufis appear. They were mystics, wanderers, lovers of God in all his infinite forms. They danced in circles until the world melted into meaning. They sang verses that blurred the line between the self and the sacred. They believed that the divine wasn't above you. It was within you. And to touch it, you didn't need gold or titles. You needed surrender. Some found that surrender in silence, others in music, and some in a dark, sticky resin called hashish. Harvested from the flowering tops of the cannabis plant, hashish was often mixed with honey, rosewater, or spices, rolled into small morsels and taken not as indulgence, but as invitation. Invitation to what? To openness, to quiet, to the breaking of the self like a mirror, so that God's reflection might shine through the cracks. One Sufi poet wrote of hashish as the veil that lifts between the lover and the beloved. Another said it helped the mind slow down enough to hear what the soul had been whispering all along. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about remembering who you truly were beneath the noise. But not everyone understood. Rulers and scholars debated its use. Was it holy or harmful? Visionary or vile? Some banned it, others embraced it quietly, and, as with all powerful things, it lived in the space between praise and punishment. But the dreamers didn't argue. They sat under trees, barefoot, smiling softly, eyes half closed, not in escape, but in communion, with birds, with light, with God. They passed the resin gently, like a sacred object, whispering verses between bites. Then they sat, listened, waited. Not every vision came in color. Sometimes it was just stillness, a moment where your breath felt like a prayer, a moment where the edge between me and everything else simply dissolved. Can a plant do that? Can it open the door to the infinite? Or was it merely a mirror, reflecting what was already inside? We'll never truly know. But we do know this. For many, hashish wasn't a sin. It was silk between the fingers of thought, a way to soften the world long enough to touch something beyond it. And there were dangers, of course. There always are. Too much, and you lost the thread. Too often, and you chased shadows instead of stars. But the wisest users, the mystics, the artists, the quietly broken, used it like one uses a candle in a cave. Not for spectacle, but for direction. There's an old story, half legend, half prayer, of a Sufi who wandered into the desert with nothing but a robe, a satchel, and a pouch of hashish. For 40 days he walked under the sun, saying no words, asking no questions. On the last day, he sat beneath a fig tree and ate a single piece of hashish mixed with pomegranate. Then he fell asleep, and in his dream, God kissed him on the forehead and said, "You have nothing, and in that you have me." When he woke, the tree was gone. The sun was rising, and he wept, not from fear, but from fullness. Was it real? Does it matter? Tonight, in your own silence, far from deserts and domes, you may not need hashish or honey to find stillness. You only need breath, and the willingness to close your eyes and listen to the quiet inside your chest. Because the sacred doesn't always come in sermons or incense. Sometimes it comes in stillness. Sometimes it comes in a dream. And sometimes it comes in the strange sweetness of a forgotten plant, carried across centuries by the hands of men who loved too deeply to speak. So sleep now, dear dreamer. Let your mind drift like smoke above a Sufi's candle, and may whatever finds you in the dark. Be gentle. The fire has nearly gone out now. Just a flicker, like a heartbeat behind the logs. And you, dear listener, have followed me through gardens of poison and prayer, through smokes, roots, and sweet deliriums. But before we say goodnight, before the candle is snuffed and the dream takes over, let's ask one final question. Why did they do it? Why did people, peasants, priests, witches, wanderers, risk so much to alter their minds? Why eat the root that screamed? Why smear the paste that burned? Why sip the wine that blurred the world? The answer, I think, is simple. Because they were human. Because life was hard. Because even in the quietest hearts, there's a longing for softness, for vision, for relief. In the Middle Ages, that longing took many forms. The mother kneeling by her child's fevered bed, whispering prayers and feeding him henbane tea. Not because she believed in magic, but because she believed in trying. The monk, breathing in incense until his thoughts fell away and only the chanting remained. Not to escape God, but to feel closer to Him. The old woman stirring herbs under a full moon, not to summon devils, but to remember the power her grandmother once carried in her bones. And the farmer, dancing madly in a field after eating bread laced with ergot, not to rebel against heaven, but because his mind had quietly come undone, and no one had taught him why. They didn't call it getting high. They called it healing. They called it devotion. They called it surviving the unbearable with whatever was available. Sometimes that meant prayer. Sometimes it meant poppies. And sometimes it meant flying. Not with wings, not with broomsticks, but with the mind, with hope, with something borrowed from the earth, lifted like a prayer, and taken with trembling hands. Even today, we're not so different. We light candles when the world feels dark. We drink tea when our thoughts grow loud. We put on music and let it carry us somewhere just a little softer than reality. We reach in our own ways for that same escape, that same door. It's not weakness. It's not madness. It's human. So perhaps the real story of these medieval highs isn't about danger or darkness. It's about resilience, about the way we find beauty and mercy wherever we can, especially when the world forgets to offer them. Because when the field is frozen and the baby won't stop crying, and the church says you don't matter, and your bones ache from a life that it's never let up, you do what you must. You sip, you smoke, you dream, you drift beyond the edge of things, and for a few sweet hours, you are more than a body. You are wind, you are light, you are free. So sleep now, traveler. You've wandered far. You've walked through fields of ghostly bread, sipped from honey jars too wild for the tongue, and breathed in incense heavy with mystery. And maybe, just maybe, as your mind softens and your breath deepens, you'll remember something important, that even in the darkest times, people found ways to rise. Not always with wisdom, not always with safety, but always with longing. And that longing, soft, holy, human, is still inside you, waiting. So close your eyes. Let the garden go quiet. And rest, knowing that someone, somewhere, once lit a fire in the night and dreamed, just like you.